I never thought a single piece of paper could change my life. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where the sunlight filtered perfectly through the blinds, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around my kitchen like a warm blanket. My golden retriever, Max, was sprawled out on the rug, his tail giving that slow, lazy wag that always made me smile. He was 10 years old, loyal, gentle, and about as threatening as a stuffed teddy bear. I was halfway through my coffee when I heard the mailbox flap. The mail carrier had been by. I wandered out in my slippers, thinking I'd just grab the electric bill and maybe one of those annoying grocery store flyers. But there it was, a thick white envelope with the bold blue letters. From the office of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. The HOA. Now, I'd had minor run-ins with them before. Nothing serious. A reminder to trim my hedges once. A note about moving my trash cans promptly after collection. Typical HOA nitpicking. But I'd never gotten anything this formal-looking. The envelope even had the HOA's seal embossed on the flap, like they were some kind of government agency. Inside was a letter, typed in overly formal language, with a tone so smug I could practically hear it speaking in a nasal voice. Dear Mr. Parker, it has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association Board that you are in violation of our updated pet policy, effective immediately as of September 1st, 2025. Specifically, your dog, a golden retriever, estimated weight 70 to 80 pounds, exceeds the newly approved limit of 20 pounds for domestic pets within our community. In accordance with Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the Willow Creek HOA regulations, you are hereby given notice to remove said animal from the property within 30 days of the date of this letter. Failure to comply will result in fines of $250 per day until compliance is achieved. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Karen H. Whitmore, President, Willow Creek HOA. I read it twice, then a third time. At first I laughed. Surely this had to be a mistake. Max had lived here with me for years without an issue. He was practically a neighborhood mascot. But the more I looked at the letter, the more I realized they were serious. They were trying to ban my dog. The rule change. That night, I dug out the HOA's rulebook from my kitchen drawer. Sure enough, there was a brand new section in the pet policy. The document had been updated just last month, and the change was glaring. Dogs over 20 pounds are prohibited from residing in Willow Creek estates, effective immediately. It didn't even make sense. Our neighborhood had German Shepherds, Labradors, Boxers, all bigger than Max. Why now? Why this rule? And why had I not heard about it before it became law? Then I noticed the signature at the bottom of the new amendment. Karen H. Whitmore, the same name from the letter. Karen was the HOA president, a woman I'd had exactly 2 conversations with since moving here 5 years ago. She lived 2 houses down, always wearing pastel sweaters and clutching her little white Pomeranian, Princess. I'd once overheard her bragging to another neighbor about how she kept this neighborhood from looking like a zoo. Neighborhood rumors. The next day, I took Max for his usual morning walk. I decided to casually bring up the letter to a couple of neighbors. Old Mr. Thompson, who had a Labrador named Duke, shook his head. "They're gunning for you, Parker," he said. "Ever since Karen took over as president, she's been pushing more rules. Wants this place to look like one of those fancy retirement communities. No big dogs, no lawn ornaments, no loud cars. The smaller and quieter, the better." Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street, leaned in and whispered, "She's jealous of Max. Everyone loves him. And Princess? Well, Princess bites." I wasn't sure if she was joking, but the more people I talked to, the clearer it became. This wasn't about safety or cleanliness. It was personal. Downfire, the first violation. Notice 3 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange slip taped to my front door. Violation notice. Non-compliant pet. They had actually taken a photo of Max lying in my front yard, printed it out, and stapled it to the notice. This is your first warning. You have 26 days remaining to comply. I crumpled the notice in my fist. That weekend, I decided to go to the HOA office in person. It was in the clubhouse by the community pool. Karen was there, sitting at a desk with her ever-present pastel sweater and princess in her lap. "Mr. Parker," she said, smiling without actually smiling. "Here to discuss compliance?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About this new pet rule. Max has lived here for years without an issue. He's well-behaved, he's loved by everyone, and this rule doesn't make sense. Could we make an exception?" Her smile froze. "The rules are the rules. Exceptions weaken the system. We can't have people bending them whenever they feel like it." "But you literally made this rule last month," I countered, "and I never got a vote, or even a notice that it was being considered." She shrugged. "The board approved it unanimously. You could have attended the meeting." I wanted to scream. The board was just Karen and her 2 friends, both of whom didn't own dogs. "Look," she said, standing up, "I'm giving you 30 days. After that, we start fines. If you don't pay, we put a lien on your house. I'd hate for it to come to that." I walked out before I said something that would get me arrested. Seeds of resistance. That night, I sat on my porch with Max's head resting on my lap. I thought about selling the house, or finding some loophole, or even temporarily sending Max to live with my sister. But the more I thought about Karen's smug face, the more my blood boiled. Why should I have to leave? Why should Max have to leave? He hadn't done a thing wrong. The problem wasn't Max. The problem was the HOA. And more specifically, the problem was Karen. I didn't know how yet, but I made myself a promise that night. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. And I was going to make sure Karen regretted ever putting Max's name on that letter. From the moment I walked out of that meeting with Karen, it was like a switch had flipped. The next morning, I noticed a white sedan rolling slowly past my house. The driver was Phyllis, one of Karen's board allies, with her phone up, snapping photos. Max was lying on the porch, tail wagging lazily, but she kept taking pictures like she'd just caught him robbing a bank. When I stepped outside and asked if I could help her, she replied with a smirk, "Documenting violations, Mr. Parker. Rules are rules." Then she drove off without another word. 2 days later, my first fine arrived. $250 for failure to comply with removal of prohibited pet. The letter came with a pink warning slip about liens and legal action. I called the so-called compliance hotline, which was really just a voicemail box that sent messages to Karen. I told her it was premature to fine me when I still had weeks before her deadline. She never called back. That weekend, I ran into Mr. Thompson while walking Max. His Labrador, Duke, was beside him. He told me the HOA had started sending him warnings about barking disturbances, even though Duke was nearly deaf and barely made a sound. A few minutes later, Mrs. Rodriguez joined us and said they had threatened her over the color of her flower pots. The more I talked to people, the more I realized I wasn't alone. Karen was tightening the screws on everyone. Things escalated when I caught Phyllis standing on the HOA-maintained greenbelt, leaning over my fence with her phone recording. "You can't have that dog out here," she shouted. I told her she was trespassing. She sniffed and said she was on HOA property, then walked off. That evening, I found a notice on my door accusing me of aggressive confrontation with HOA officials. I decided to face them directly at the next HOA meeting. The clubhouse was half full when I walked in. Karen sat at the head of the table with Phyllis on one side and a man named Carl on the other. When my turn came during the resident concerns section, I stood and said the pet policy was unfair and selectively enforced. Karen smiled thinly and said the rules were applied equally. Carl chimed in, explaining the board had voted on it, and that was how the process works. I pointed out that homeowners had never been given a chance to vote. Some neighbors nodded, others looked away. After the meeting, Karen caught up to me in the hallway. Her voice was low and cold. "You're making this harder than it has to be. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it. I can fine you into bankruptcy if I have to." That was the first time she dropped the fake friendliness entirely. The next week, the fines piled up. One for Max being visible in the yard, another for his bark being audible from the property line. Once they even sent 2 fines in the same day. It was clear they wanted to break me financially before the deadline came. Then, one night, I came home to find a letter taped to my front door in red ink. It said I owed $2,000 in fines and had 10 days to pay, or they'd start legal action. Inside, Max was wagging his tail like nothing was wrong, and that's when it hit me. I'd been letting Karen dictate the game. I'd been reacting instead of fighting back. That was over. If she wanted to come after me, I was going to find a way to hit back harder than she ever expected. I realized quickly that fighting the HOA head-on with emotion was pointless. Karen thrived on control, on watching people squirm when they realized they had no power against her and her little board. But what if I could pull the rug out from under her? What if I could show the entire neighborhood that she wasn't the guardian of rules she pretended to be, but a hypocrite who bent them for herself? That would be the only way to win. So I began my quiet investigation. The first step was getting access to the HOA's records. According to state law, homeowners had the right to request certain documents, meeting minutes, financial statements, budgets, so long as they gave written notice. I drafted a polite email requesting the last 3 years of records. Predictably, Karen replied that I could review them in person during business hours, which meant Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., exactly when I was at work. She was hoping I'd give up. I didn't. I took a vacation day and showed up at the clubhouse right when they opened. Karen's face froze when she saw me. She reluctantly slid a dusty cardboard box across the table. "Everything's in there. You have 1 hour," she said, like she was doing me a favor. I started digging. It didn't take long to notice strange things. There were multiple invoices from a landscaping company, Green Haven Services, totaling over $8,000. The work descriptions were vague: seasonal maintenance, tree removal, decorative planting. I knew for a fact no such work had been done on community property. Then it clicked. Green Haven was the company that serviced Karen's yard. I'd seen their truck in her driveway at least a dozen times. She was using HOA funds to pay for her personal landscaping. That alone could take her down. But I didn't stop there. I found meeting minutes with votes taken when quorum wasn't even met. I found unexplained administrative expenses for gift baskets and event planning when no events had actually occurred. And I found something explosive, a past dispute where Karen had fined another homeowner into foreclosure, then convinced the board to buy the property at auction at a massive discount. I left with pages of notes and a quiet, growing sense of power. The next step was rallying allies. Over the next 2 weeks, I knocked on doors. I started with people I already knew were frustrated: Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Rodriguez, and a few younger families who had been fined for trivial things. I didn't just complain. I showed them what I'd found. Faces hardened. People who had been afraid to speak up started to lean forward, asking questions. It turned out nearly everyone had a story about Karen's overreach. A family fined for a trampoline. An elderly man harassed for having a faded mailbox. Someone else told me Karen had screamed at their teenage son for skateboarding in the cul-de-sac. We decided the only way to win was to remove the board entirely. Our HOA bylaws allowed for a special meeting to recall board members if at least 25% of homeowners signed a petition. We needed 42 signatures. We aimed for 60 to make it unshakable. I spent my evenings going door to door, sometimes with Max in tow. People warmed up quickly when they saw him wagging his tail. "They want to get rid of this guy?" I'd say, scratching behind his ears. "That's reason enough to sign." It was working. Karen must have caught wind of it, because the harassment suddenly ramped up again. I started getting fines for unapproved holiday lighting, even though it was October and I had no decorations up. A warning for failure to maintain lawn height, even though my grass was freshly mowed. Phyllis was back to taking daily pictures, this time even photographing my guests' cars. But the more they pushed, the more neighbors signed. We hit 61 signatures in just under 3 weeks. The petition went in, and by law, the board had to schedule a special meeting within 30 days. Karen tried to stall. First, she claimed the signatures weren't valid because some names were illegible. Then she said the clubhouse was booked for weeks. We countered with the fact that bylaws required a meeting regardless of location and offered to hold it in my own front yard. It was becoming clear this was turning into a full-scale showdown. I'd started as the guy just trying to keep his dog. Now, I was leading a neighborhood rebellion. And Karen? She was finally looking nervous. The night before the meeting, I sat on my porch with Max, looking out over the quiet street. "Tomorrow's the day, buddy," I said, patting his head. He didn't understand the stakes, but I swear his eyes had that calm confidence that said we were going to win. I had the petition. I had the evidence. I had the neighborhood on my side. The only thing left was to bring it all to light and make sure the right people saw it. Tomorrow, we'd find out just how much power the HOA president really had when she was standing alone. The morning of the special meeting felt different. The air was sharp, the kind that makes your chest feel tight when you breathe in. I walked Max early, letting him sniff every patch of grass he wanted. By the time we got home, I had my binder of evidence ready. Printouts of financial statements, copies of invoices, meeting minutes, and most importantly, the petition with 61 signatures. The meeting was held in the clubhouse. By the time I arrived, nearly every folding chair was taken. Karen sat at the head of the table in her usual pastel sweater, her little dog Princess in her lap. Phyllis and Carl flanked her, but they didn't look as confident as usual. I caught Karen's eyes as I walked in. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. When the meeting began, Karen tried to keep control. She announced the agenda, read a prepared statement about maintaining the integrity of the neighborhood, and then opened the floor. I stood immediately, binder in hand. Before we proceed, I want to present the petition to recall the current HOA board. I handed copies to the residents sitting nearby. Murmurs spread quickly through the room. Karen's voice was sharp. "Mr. Parker, this is not the time." "It is exactly the time," I said. According to the bylaws, this meeting was called for the purpose of a recall vote. And before we vote, everyone here deserves to know what this board has been doing with our money and our trust. I opened the binder and started with the landscaping invoices. over $8,000 of HOA funds paid to a company that services only one property in this neighborhood, Karen Whitmore's. I flipped to the next page. Multiple closed-door meetings with no quorum, during which policies were passed without homeowner input, unexplained administrative expenses, and a property foreclosure where the board purchased the house at auction for pennies and resold it at a massive profit. None of this is legal, and it certainly isn't ethical. Karen tried to cut me off. These accusations are baseless. They're not accusations, I said, holding up copies of the documents. They're your own records. The room erupted in whispers. Mr. Thompson stood up from the back. I've lived here 20 years, and I've never seen anything this crooked. Mrs. Rodriguez added, She fined my kids for riding bikes on the sidewalk. This isn't about rules, it's about control. Karen's face had gone pale. She looked at Phyllis and Carl, but neither would meet her eyes. I kept going, explaining how the petition met every requirement, how the bylaws allowed for a vote right then and there. Someone called for a show of hands. It was overwhelming. Out of nearly 50 residents present, only 3 voted to keep the current board, and 2 of them were Karen and Phyllis. Just like that, it was over. The board was dissolved. A temporary committee was appointed to manage community affairs until a fair election could be held. Karen sat rigid in her chair, Princess whining in her lap, while people began talking about new rules, fair enforcement, and transparency. I walked outside into the late afternoon sun, Max trotting happily beside me. Several neighbors stopped to scratch his head and tell me they were glad we'd fought back. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. That night I sat on the porch, Max stretched out at my feet. The street was quiet, peaceful, in a way it hadn't been since the first letter arrived. I thought about everything that had happened, the intimidation, the fines, the meetings, the digging through dusty boxes of files. It had all been worth it. Karen had tried to take Max away from me. Instead, she'd lost everything. And now, without the HOA's chokehold, Willow Creek finally felt like home again. I looked down at Max and grinned. We won, buddy. His tail thumped against the porch, slow and steady, like he'd known all along how this would end.